Hello and welcome to another episode of Steelfur Speaks. I am Steelfur. The UK Pummel has returned. What is the famously within Flesh and Blood history? Is it UK national? One player hit the other player with a pummel, and the player forgot to say please discard a card, and the other player did not. Went to the next turn, having not discarded the card, and obviously it missed. It later emerged that the player knew that they had to discard a card. This is kind of what makes, but they didn't because their opponent didn't ask them to, and that kind of put a bit of a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And now we've seen something very, very similar, which is kind of creating a similar level of dialogue. So this was at the most recent tournament in Memphis. I don't know if it happened. I don't think it happened on. But essentially, Enigma player, and the Enigma player landed a pummel with a CNC trigger. And there's a few layers to what's going on. But basically, Brody spent a lot of time trying to decide how to block Command Conquer, as he does, and we'll talk about that. And then the pummel happened, and then they both hit, and then we went. They were the turn ended. They went to the next turn, at which point a judge came and said, who was watching the table, said, "Oh, you didn't discard to pummel," and Brody responded, "Well, judges aren't supposed to interfere." The judge was like, "Oh wait, actually, maybe I'm not." Goes and talks to the head judge, who then says, "No, you're right. Judges aren't supposed to interfere." And then the game continues, and he neither has destroyed his arsenal or discarded a card. Now, there's several layers of what's going on here that I just want to unpack. So, did Brody know that he should have been discarding to pummel in the CNC? Yes, probably because he spent ages thinking about how to block CNC. And typically, in these games, pummel is not. It's kind of telegraphed based on the resources on the board. So if you're playing at that level, you do have to consider there'll be a pummel. So if you're tanking for that long, I think 4 minutes, the number I've heard, to think about whether you're going to block a CNC with that kind of resource board, you must be considering the on-hit effect of the CNC and the on-hit effect of the pummel. So I think it is reasonable to say that a player who is capable of winning a calling and being player of the year is also capable of knowing that he has to discard a card for a pummel. Secondly, there's the judge interfering, which they're not supposed to do. Get that out of the way, right? So judges do not interfere in tables unless asked or unless there's. That is a standard. The primary reason for that is that every game of FAB should be played to the same level, and it's not fair necessarily for one game to be held to a higher standard just because there is a judge nearby, if that makes sense. So the onus is on the players to both correct their own mistakes, but also spot their own mistakes, and that's how it makes it fair for everyone. Because otherwise, the tables that are closest to the judges, where they stand at the end of the row, will get judged harshly, and the ones in the middle won't. Now, there is an argument that every game of FAB should be aimed to be played perfectly, and therefore it shouldn't matter if a judge interferes or not, but that's a bit naive. There are mistakes. It is on the players' skill in the game, aka the memory of triggers and how things are working, to ensure that the game is played to a high standard. And if something is missed because of a lack of ability to remember it, that is an indication of player skill, and that should be reflected by the games of. Right, so that's fair. But did Brody know that he should be discarding to CNC and pummel? I think it's pretty clear that he would have known based on how long he thought about the blocks and his. So why didn't he? Well, did he break a rule? I mean, this is what it comes down to. So when this UK pummel gate happened, blew up the internet, and everyone was like, "Oh, UK players are cheaters." The player who was responsible correctly said, "Actually, I have not broken a single rule. It is on my opponent to play and enforce their triggers. They do not remind me. I do not have to." Now, within the official rules of the game, that is 100% correct. Most people will help their opponent remember triggers because that's how they want the game to be played. Technically, you do not have to. Both players are responsible for maintaining the game state and making sure all mandatory triggers are applied, but not all triggers are mandatory. So you do not have to apply on hit triggers sometimes, for example. So if they are missed, then they might just be. And especially if it's a, you know, positive effect for one player and a detrimental effect for another player, it is basically on the person who is playing the cards to ensure that the ability is, is enacted. And that is for a very good reason. TCGs rely on the player who is playing the card to have knowledge of how the card works, and it's not fair to punish the opponent for not knowing the cards that aren't in their deck as well as the person playing, right? And if people are responsible when your opponent misplays something that you've played, if you're not responsible for it, you can get into this weird dark area where I'm playing cards and I'm not telling my opponents what to do in the hope that they'll make a mistake. And therefore I can get them punished because they didn't do what was said on the card perfectly, though I didn't tell them and it was my card. It is overall just better for people to be responsible for their cards being played and their effects being triggered. And really, it's actually unfortunately not practical to say that you are responsible for something on your opponent's card that they do not make. Right now, in practice, a lot of people would like people to play with the knowledge of the cards they have. That means if you see a CNC, you should, you should discard your arsenal because you know your opponent is to say that. It's not an edge case. It's not a, oh, there's three options and I'm hoping my opponent will choose the one that's better for me. Like if my opponent hits me with Coax of Commotion and I, try and get them to choose the option that supports me the best, and I'm telling them that's how the rules work, right? That's illegal. But if I hit them with Coax of Commotion and they give themselves a token and I don't take one as well, right? You see what I'm saying here? So it remains on every player to say the responsibility of their cards. The sad reality is you cannot put responsibility on the opponent for enacting and ensuring that your cards are played correctly. You have to make sure it's done. In practice, that unfortunately does mean that if you hit someone with a pummel or a CNC, you need to make sure that card is discarded before you go on to the next step. However, um, while I'll accept this whole Pummelgate thing is, it's more of a sportsmanship question than a rules question. People are merely expressing that they would like people to play a game of FAB where every on-hit effect is both applied by both people, and that's a social thing more than anything else. The thing that really irks me about this, and I'll be genuinely honest, I like Brody. I think he plays the game well. Don't think I've met him in person, but I've heard reasonably good things about him as a person to interact with. But it's getting a little bit ridiculous. He slow plays a lot, and I know he's been trying to improve, but he slow plays a lot. And you can see it on stream, you can see it in Battle Hardens, where the events he's in the top 8 overrun by a significant amount of time because they're not timed, causing a whole discussion about whether they need to be timed. You can see it in just his opponents getting tired and frustrated. You can see it with him getting multiple slow play warnings at every event that he has been to for the past 6 months. And the fact is that, unfortunately, when you play slowly and your opponent doesn't, they are more likely to miss things. If you take 4 minutes to block an on-hit effect, it is more likely for your opponent to forget the attack had the on-hit effect and just want to get on with the next turn. And the fact is that every time you take 5 minutes of the clock, you're taking 5 minutes of the overall game time. And that means that you have an advantage in thinking to map out or plan what you're going to do over your opponent, and it's completely unrealistic and unfair. Now, there are certain situations, which is why the rules aren't hard codified, saying, oh, you can never take more than 2 minutes on a turn. There are certain situations where taking more time makes sense. When a Kano player is trying to work out that final piece of math, and they're going to die if they don't get it correct. And that means the game will be over in those 5 minutes. Either way that it goes, it's okay to give that player another 5 minutes. Personally, I dislike that. I think the Kano player has to maintain a reasonable rate of play. They can't just sit there thinking in their mind palace for 5 minutes of my time, because what if they mess it up and I mess it up and the game doesn't end? Suddenly I've given that player 5 minutes more of the time on the clock than they should have. I think Kano players should be playing cards during their thinking time. They shouldn't just be able to sit there and think before they play any cards. They need to maintain a reasonable rate of pace. But I have lost that argument many times. But the point is, players have to maintain a reasonable state of play and pace of play. But it's not codified in the rules because there are times when it's recognized that discretion is advised and things will take more time to think about. Like if someone is deciding on their final block when both people are on 5 life. But the entire game can't be full of these 5-minute thinking periods. That is slow play. It is slow play by definition. And one of the ways you know that it's slow play, aside from the fact that anyone else looking at the table would see the lines available within a reasonable amount of time, which is how judges determine whether it's slow play. So the judge instruction is if you can walk up to the table, read all the cards on the hand and in the board, and determine 2 or 3 lines of play, then the player is slow playing. If you've had the time to do that and they still haven't played a card, then they are slow playing. Right? That's the judge instruction. The reality is like somewhere between 45 seconds to 1 to make a decision is fair. Less time on your turn because you should have been thinking about what you were going to do during your blocking step if you blocked, but that's another thing entirely. But it shouldn't be 5 minutes, except in very rare circumstances where decisions are very complex or there is a lot of players. Brody is repeatedly doing this and repeatedly getting warnings for it. It's not just my opinion. He is repeatedly getting warnings from judges about his behavior. So that implies, yes, there is a problem. Yes, there is a recurring problem. And if his opponents played at the same speed as him, every single game would go to a draw. But they don't. What actually happens is that his opponents, seeing that time is disappearing and that Brody is slow playing and not getting punished for it, have to play faster in order to make up that time, which means that Brody not only gains an advantage via his opponents playing faster and potentially making mistakes, e.g. forgetting to enforce a Pummel CC trigger, just the latest example, but B, also more time to think himself. That's why this is a problem, and that's why slow play is a punished activity. But in my opinion, the system is currently failing. The system is currently failing because we have a player who is repeatedly taking an activity which is against the rules and repeating it at every single high-level event. They are repeatedly showing that they are willing to take more time on the clock than their opponents, slow play so they can have more of an advantage in terms of thinking, and that then advantage is turning into prizes. It is turning into victories. Now, there's a question how much Brody would win if he didn't think so long and if he didn't slow play. I don't know. We'll find out. But what I'm saying is, and this is the problem, we have a player who is repeatedly doing an activity that is against the rules. They are doing it across multiple high-level events, and the extent of the punishment they receive is a warning within that individual event. What should be happening, and you can disagree with me in the comments if you think, when you have a player who has a repeated infraction of the rules across multiple events, is that the player should start off with a harsher punishment at the next event that they go to. So if you had apply this to any other thing that goes on. So if you have a player who's accidentally ticking up tunic, one too many times, or you have a player who's forgetting to, repeatedly forgetting to destroy their agility tokens, go again, or any other sort of violation. Now, those are a bit more explicit, right? Because they're not, they're not this fuzzy area of judge discretion. But you can see what I'm talking about. You have a player who is repeatedly doing a violation of the rules. Judges are going to quickly learn who that player is. Judges are quickly going to watch for that behavior. And that person is going to get punished more harshly when they show up at the next event. That is what should happen. You should go up to that person and say, look, in the last 2 competitive events you were in the top 8, we saw you do X. If that behavior is repeated at this event, the initial penalty will start 1 track higher. It will start at an IP2. if that behavior proceeds on 1, 2, 3 times, then that behavior, the punishment will escalate. You shouldn't start with a clean slate. Now, obviously, this rule should apply to the best players in the game because those are the ones on the stream. Those are the ones we see. Those are the ones who everyone's eyes are on. Those are the banner players of the game. Like the other infraction that happened at this event, which was, quite serious as well, was a player forgetting to destroy his Metacarpus nodes when he had used them before, which led to another turn where he could use Arcane Barrier and another turn where he could use Metacarpus nodes damage. Now, I've heard apocryphally that that guy has apologized to his opponent for making the mistake, offered a share of his winnings, and tried to make amends. Great, congratulations. If that's true, that's sportsmanship I love to see. But, equally, the next time that person goes to an event playing Kano and is doing well, because, come on, let's be honest, we care about the people who are winning. If the person is, doing the same behavior repeatedly and not benefiting from it, then they're probably not cheating because it's not deliberate, right? But if that player goes to an event and is doing well with Kano again and ends up on like 4-0 or 5-0, the judges should be watching him closer because there is a record that he was given a warning for and this behavior, and he should be punished more harshly for repeating his mistakes in a competitive environment, right? And the same should be true of Brody and of anyone who does these kind of things. If you are repeatedly slow playing at multiple events and it happens enough that it is noted by the community, it happens enough that there are jokes that the event at a battle hardened won't finish on time because you made the top 8, then there is a problem. And the real issue that FAB has is that it's an optics problem as well, because if you punish that player who's the head of the player of the year track, who's like one of the youngest players playing the game and winning, like it doesn't look good. But equally, this doesn't look good either. He can't get away with doing something because a lot of the sentiment I was reading online was people saying, if I did that, I would get the book thrown at me. If I slow played that much, I would be in trouble. There is a perception of favoritism that is happening now. And it's really for Brody to, start to do things properly. And it is for judges to start punishing him according to the behavior that he's done. Right? We can't have integrity and not apply the rules fairly to people in events, and that needs to happen. Yeah, so UK Pummelgate. I'm actually not so frustrated about the pummel part. I think it's more of a consequence. Brody spends so long thinking about blocks that his opponent forgets to enforce his triggers and just wants to get to the next turn. When called out on the fact the triggers didn't hit, Brody corrects the judge correctly that he should not be interfering, but the whole interaction of the time that it took to block, the fact the triggers didn't hit, the fact that the judge isn't allowed to interfere, like if you're the opponent, everything here has gone wrong. You just want to get on with the game. You're probably not thinking, I can appeal. And you want to know the funny and kind of sad thing about this is that if that opponent, once the judge had interfered and he'd been corrected that he shouldn't interfere, had put up his hand and said, Judge, now that I'm aware the trigger has been missed, regardless of how I became aware, I would like an appeal and I would like that trigger enforced. If he had said that, it's very, very likely that he would have got the rewind, right? Because they were on the next turn on the first attack played of that turn, and that attack had not been played from Arsenal. So it would have been very, very easy to force Brody to pick up that card and to rewind to the missed triggers, both of them, the CNC and the pummel. And unfortunately, because the opponent didn't say, actually, I would like appeal, and maybe he didn't think he could because the head judge had already said, no, you're right, my judge shouldn't have interfered. But it doesn't matter how you became aware of the information. You can definitely ask for an appeal when you're aware of the information. So that player should have asked for an appeal, and he probably would have gotten a rewind. Brody just needs to think faster and not slow play as much. And judges just need to start actually punishing slow play. There are loads of instances in this game where slow play is being observed and not being punished. It's hard to put stricter rules on it because there are times when slow play is necessary. But the fact is we just need this addressed, and we need it addressed on an individual level. People need to be punished if they're repeatedly doing the same negative behavior across multiple tournaments, and they also need to be punished, and they also just need to be monitored, right? We need to have integrity. Unfortunately, people do need to be responsible for their own cards. If you miss a trigger, that is on you, as it always has been. But I would like to believe we're in a world where people help each other play the best game of Fab that it could be. I've got two other topics I want to talk about. I want to talk about stream judging for a second, and then I want to talk about like judge staffing and diversity, because I've got a spreadsheet I want to show you guys. So if you're falling asleep at the idea of a spreadsheet, just listen to me talk about stream judging for a second. Without a doubt in my mind, there should 100% be a stream judge for Flesh and Blood, right? I understand there's two current arguments as to why that doesn't exist, which I've heard directly from the judge team themselves. The first one is that they don't think the judge table should be held to a higher standard of Fab than a random table at the event, right? And the second one is that they don't think the judge who is on the judge table should be held responsible for the mistakes that will eventually happen during the day, where they will miss something that the audience sees and they will get lambasted for it, they will get attacked for it. So to the first one, I say, I understand where you're coming from, but from my perspective, the stream is a marketing tool for Flesh and Blood, right? And as a marketing tool for Flesh and Blood, it needs to display the best quality of Flesh and Blood ever. Every single tournament we've had so far has had a moment or two where someone has made a mistake on stream, they've been called out by it, they've had a bit of abuse about it by the chat, it's had some negative impacts. A judge there would stop that on the players. And also, it would just show that the Fab is being played well, that judges are involved, the whole ecosystem is thriving, and it would show the best possible game of Fab there is. So there should be a stream judge. It seems unthinkable there isn't, and especially once you get to the top cut in any large event, there should be a stream judge with power to intervene and make sure every trigger is delivered. I do not want the top cut or any win-and-ins or critical moments of Flesh and Blood to be determined by someone missing a mandatory trigger and that creating a negative environment for that. And I don't care if it lowers the skill ceiling so that players who cannot remember their triggers can occasionally get on stream and win. Because let's face it, if you keep repeatedly missing your triggers, A, you're probably not getting your winning in into your top 8, and B, the judge can give you warnings and penalties for it. So a judge is not going to sit there and play the game for anyone. If someone is repeatedly forgetting their triggers on the stream game, the judge is going to say, look, you need to remember your triggers now. And it's going to become pretty apparent to the chat as well that the person cannot remember their triggers. And then it's going to be a case of, oh, this player's probably new, he probably shouldn't be here. A judge correcting one trigger in a game, fine. 2, 3, fine. Anything more than that, it's going to become quickly apparent what's going on, and that backlash that people are expecting is not going to materialize if the judge stops correcting triggers and just says, look, I'm going to let the game happen the way it is, right? Because people are going to be like, okay, that player's clearly new, he can't remember his triggers. It's better for the judge not to interfere and just let that player lose the game, unless those triggers are negative to the player, in which case they should be enforced, right? You get what I'm saying here. There's a way to handle the issues where a judge is overcorrecting the game by just saying, look, this isn't great, or issuing penalties for repeatedly missing missed triggers, right? On the subject of judges being attacked, like, hate to be mean, but we need judges with a backbone. I've been playing TCGs for over 20 years. I've met judges who would go on as a stream judge without even a second thought. And if chat started getting annoyed at them or called them out after the event, they'd be like, okay, but I was doing my job and I made the right calls like 99% of the time. Why didn't you go do one? Like, we need a judge who is a stream judge and has, the ability to push back against people being dumb to them on social media, right? We need someone who has a bit of savvy, who is a good judge, and also just doesn't give a crap if people on the internet are wrong. Like, the answer to what if judges get given out to for being the stream judge isn't to not judge the stream, it's to get the sort of judge that doesn't care about people online and their opinions. It's to get a judge who's going to be right the majority of the time and make things run smoothly and help everyone play the best game of Fab that everyone wants to see on stream. And then when things go wrong, just to be like, okay, cool, my bad. How about the next one? Like, we can handle this socially as a community. The judge doesn't have to be perfect. Players aren't perfect either. But the fact that we're not going to do it because some judge might get yelled at, well, no, well, let's just find a judge that can handle it. Like, there are plenty of people who are willing to be the public face of a thing. I'm sure there's a judge who is probably willing to take that level of, online criticism for a couple booster boxes extra at every event, right? I don't see the issue here. The real problem is not finding the right person for the job. It's not getting rid of the job altogether. Right, third segment, and we're going to be quick about this because I don't want to get into it too much. I have said for a while that I'm concerned about diversity in the judge track. Now, before the Americans get annoyed at me, I'm not talking about gender or sexuality or any of those things, right? I'll address that quickly. People are cool. Let people do whatever the fuck they want. Don't come in here with your bigoted shit, right? I've always made that clear. I accept people for they are. I'm here to play cards. Don't really care what's going on anywhere with you. Show up in a dress. Cool. Are you cosplaying? Are you not? I don't really mind. Are you having a good time? That's the question that matters. I'm here for all kinds of diversity because that makes a nicer game where people feel welcomed and it's fun, and it means that my game shop is less likely to smell of body odor because people feel more self-conscious when there are other people around. Right, moving on. And all the other reasons. It's just good. Be who you want to be, right? But I am talking about diversity specifically in terms of people rather than types of people, if that makes sense. So I have put together a rather fun spreadsheet. I won't give you the link because I'm doing working in the background and I've got pay charts and I've got stuff like this. But essentially, I put in every single large event and I put in every single judge that is working at those large events, right? And the purpose of this is to identify what I see as issues with the judge system, right? Because as I have always said, what is key to a good judge system at TCG is strong community, so people want to judge and go to events and see their friends with other judges, good management, consistent ruling, and also just strength and diversity. And as I have called out before, I am frustrated, specifically, this is my bias, at the lack of a high-ranking UK judge taking part on the EU level as a team leader, event leader, calling judge at that level, right? I'll put that bias clearly on the table. I think the UK is a huge market in Europe, and I know that there are judges in the UK who want to be involved at that level that have not been able to. And I think that one of the reasons that I get so annoyed about UK players being punished quite harshly at international events is that it does feel like there is not a voice to represent them on the international stage. And we know cultures are different. We know people are different. Having every big sport in the world has multiple judges who represent the countries that are playing in the competition to help them represent cultural differences, right? So you wouldn't go to a football match in the World Cup where England are playing and not have an England judge somewhere involved in the process, right? At least just to make sure that the other judge from somewhere else in Europe isn't being biased, right? Every sport has more diversity. So I want to just take a look at diversity. I also want to look a little bit at something that I noticed that was concerning me, right? Just as an independent player, right? I want to see more UK judges involved, but I'm not like saying that they should be involved at the expense of other people. I more started this process because I was just kind of curious about a specific question. And my question was about like the pathway to being a top judge and like how resilient the FABTCG judge program is, right? That's basically where this question started, because I was like seeing a lot of the same faces and I was kind of like, well, are people moving up through the ranks? Like, is someone coming in to replace these people? If this person goes, does that mean there's no one to do that job? Like, there was lots of questions going around in my head. So I thought, well, okay, let's just have a look at the data and just try and see what that tells me about how many people are trying to get involved in head judging, how many people are doing it and sticking around, if that makes sense. you know, and all these questions I think are quite valid and quite interesting. So I did this tracker, and what it revealed was very interesting to me. Obviously, we've got tons of judges. This is people are coming up multiple times, but basically, there's a lot of events have been happening. A lot of judges at all those events. They've all been doing a pretty fantastic job. Let's be honest. But my information did reveal certain things. So in the past year, including 2025, 2024, at the calling judge, calling support judge, world's judge level, so that very top level, there's an interesting pattern that I just want to draw people's attention to. I mean, good, bad, whatever, but let's just draw people's attention to. Okay, in the USA, there have been 10, I think this is 10, this is in 2024. So in 2024, there were 10 large-scale events. Let me just 1 second. All right, I just went and corrected my work behind the screen. I have a pause button, shock. Right, so in 2024 through to 2025, there were 12 large US events. There were 17 in Europe, and APAC, there were 18, right? Of those events, the number of people who were in that calling judge or calling support judge or role is laid out on the right-hand side. So what that means is that the US had 10 people who were in the calling judge or, basically head judge role, capable. The EU had 3, and APAC, which is the developing region, had 3. So in the US, there were probably too many. You might not need that much variety. And in the US, in the EU and APAC, there was probably not enough variety. Now, this is both in the head judge and the sub-head judge role. So what we'd like to see, and what we have seen in the US, is the head judge and the support judge has changed quite a few times. And also, who is the support judge has changed quite a few times as well. So that means that someone is coming in as the support judge and then moving up to head judge, doing some head judging, etc., and being quite consistent with that. And you can see like certain names cropping up over and over again. But in the EU, that's not happening, and in APAC as well, though there's, obviously more of a focus in APAC. And one of the things I will say, actually, is that it's more common for an EU judge to go to APAC and help them in a role, which is kind of understandable because APAC is still a developing market, so you don't necessarily have, tier 2 judges capable of level 2 or higher judges capable of being the head of a calling. So it makes more sense that, the head of the judge program will go and help those get off the ground, those kind of things. So I'm not really saying that's an issue, but the EU does worry me specifically because you essentially have 3 names constantly being either the head judge or the top judge of every event. And that lack of diversity just alarms me slightly, right? It alarms me slightly because I see a very healthy pathway in the US, and I don't know that I see the same pathway in the UK. Not in the UK, in Europe. And I do wonder if that pathway will develop in Asia. I'm sure it will. The really interesting thing will be to come back to this in like 2 years' time and see what's happening in APAC and whether that pathway is developed and see if it's still not in Europe. Now, it's hard when you're good at a job to, let other people do the job, right? You obviously want to keep doing it. I understand that perfectly. But the reason that this worries me is just talking about pathways to promotion. Right, so you've got someone who's, say, involved in judging, wants to judge at a high level, and all they see is, it's just the top 2 people sitting there always being the judges at a high level. They're not going to think I can have that person's job because they're never seeing anyone else try it on, which will disincentivize them from getting into that position or trying to get into that position because it's like, oh, well, it's always going to be person X, person Y. So you're not really creating this pathway. But also, if one of these people decides to step away and there isn't someone who has experienced or, has experience as a sub lead or any of those kind of things, then you start to encounter frailty within the system. So I guess, I mean, in some ways, looking at this from someone who's external, who likes reviewing this kind of things, I think would be good to see in the next year more people being given that sub role, more people being given a chance to head judge a calling, just a bit more variety in the European sphere. I would like it. I doesn't necessarily need to get up to the US, but I think I would like to see a few more names on there. And airing my own personal bias, I would like to see a UK name. I would like to see one of the good UK judges representing one of the largest markets in the European continent being put forward to be a lead at one of these large events. I'm sure they can do it if they want to do it. I'm sure there is someone qualified. And I think the UK market is large enough in the FAB sphere that they demand, like we collectively probably demand a seat at the table in terms of the highest level of judges in our continent. I think you wouldn't turn around and say Japan can't have a head judge who judges one of their callings. I don't think you would turn around and say, New Zealand can't do this, or something like that. I think you would say, okay, you have a UK judge, and it will be really telling for me. In fact, I might just go look this up because it might be up already. All right, I did actually go and check, and so Pro Tour London is obviously coming up. And none of those higher spots are filled with anyone from the UK. A lot of people ported in from other places. There are a few UK team leads. There are also about 10 judges from the UK, which is great to see. So there is a bit of UK representation at our Pro Tour, but what better chance to push a UK judge to do more or be more than at a Pro Tour hosted in their own country, right? So, again, diversity is good. Let's leave it at that. I've kind of shown you the data. I'll let people make their own conclusions. I guess to further finish that thought that I was on, it's more like at a Pro Tour, I would expect one person in one of these sub roles to be someone who is young, like who is new and has demonstrated the capabilities. I've just gone during the pause and reviewed all the names of people in a head judge or supporting judge role at the Pro Tour, and they are all names that have already appeared on this list, which means that no one in that environment, which is huge, there's so many judges on that docket, is being tested in that role when there's so many other people around them that could help them, correct them, move them up, right? So we are taking this great opportunity and we're wasting it, right? We're wasting the opportunity to create more diversity within that group of people who is capable and has judged at the highest level of FAB. And that's kind of really what I wanted the sheet to remunerate. Again, you've noticed I'm not saying names, even though they're on the sheet. I'm not calling out specific people. I don't really want to do that. Obviously the person who leads the whole judge program is going to show up judging on the list a lot, right? They should be able to. That's fine. They're probably somewhat decent at it. Not I haven't worked with them, so it's not my place to judge. But my point is that I just wanted to ask a question about health in the judge program. It kind of ties into everything we've talked about. Because when you have limited people at the top and a decision is made like how do we enforce slow play, there's a lot less discourse about making it better. And one of the things that I have disliked the most about Flesh and Blood's judge program is the lack of discourse about certain decisions. All you will hear about the recent infraction is that the judges have reviewed it, are happy with their decisions, they've spoken to both players, and that's it. You will never get clarification from a judge as to what happened. And I think as a community, we deserve to know what happened. We've had players banned over things that we thought weren't bannable. We've had players not banned over things that looked bannable. Clarification as to what exactly happened counters the rumor bill. But you kind of need to foment change by bringing in more diversity. Anyway, so that's the thing. I didn't want to particularly, go into this too much, but I thought it was an interesting topic. And you've kind of seen that spreadsheet now, and you kind of see what I'm getting at, is that there is room for more diversity. I would like to see more fail-safes built in, more people who are being brought up to fill these key roles, and with my own personal bias, more emphasis placed on the capabilities of someone from the UK who is good and effective to represent us as one of those team leaders. I feel like we're one of the largest Flesh and Blood markets that doesn't have someone who is regularly judging callings. And given that we have a calling every year, we should probably have a UK judge that can handle the calling that we have every year, right? And the Pro Tour, where we have, I think, 8 to 10, head judge like roles, and none of them are filled with UK judges. I think we have the lead on the Battle Hardened, but that's the Battle Hardened. It's a 1-day event. It's, it's not a calling. It's not a Pro Tour. It's not anything like that. So I'm gonna leave that where it is. Congratulations, you can judge a Battle Hardened, but I think one of those positions should have been used to bring a UK judge up to the level to judge our calling. I think it's a wasted opportunity. So you've heard me talk about Brody. You've heard me talk about time wasting and repeated punishments, and you've heard me talk about Pummelgate, and you've heard me talk about judge diversity. If this isn't a spicy podcast, I don't know what more I can do for you guys and girls and people in between. Because yeah, remember what I said: diversity. Don't come here with that stuff. I don't care if you stop listening to the podcast and unsubscribe because you're like, oh, he likes the trans people. Yeah, cool, whatever. Doesn't affect my life. People can be good. People can for themselves. Right? People can live the way they want to live, and that's it. There we go. Talk to you all very soon.